Margaret sat at the dinner table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching her daughters laugh. But they weren't laughing with her. They were laughing at her. Honestly, what does Mom even do anymore? Vivian said, twirling her wine glass. Her diamond bracelet caught the chandelier light, throwing sparkles across the white tablecloth. She's basically retired from being useful. The table erupted. Clara giggled behind her manicured hand. Trent, Vivian's husband, smirked into a scotch. Even Gerald, Clara's quiet accountant husband, let out an uncomfortable chuckle. Margaret smiled. She always smiled. That's what good mothers do, right? They absorb the blows. They turn the other cheek. They pretend their hearts aren't breaking into 1,000 tiny pieces beneath their sensible cardigans. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. But something shifted in that moment. Something cold and sharp settled behind Margaret's ribs. She felt it slide into place like a key turning in a lock she'd kept bolted for years. More wine, Mother? Clara asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. No, thank you, dear. Margaret's voice came out steady.
Calm.
Almost too calm. She looked around the table at the faces of the people she'd given everything to. Vivian, in her designer dress that cost more than Margaret's monthly social security check. Clara, with her fresh highlights and that new nose she thought no one noticed. Their husbands, comfortable and confident, sitting in chairs Margaret had bought, eating food she'd prepared, in a house she'd helped them purchase. They had no idea. Margaret excused herself quietly, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin before standing. No one really noticed. They were already on to the next topic, something about a vacation home in the Hamptons. She walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and stared at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked tired. 72 years of tired. But her eyes? Her eyes weren't tired at all. They were sharp, focused, almost dangerous. She whispered to the woman in the mirror, her voice barely audible over the muffled laughter from the dining room. They think I'm useless? A pause. The faucet dripped once.
Twice.
Let's see what happens when they learn the truth. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, you need to hear what happens next. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is about to get very interesting. Margaret wasn't always the woman her daughters dismissed over dinner wine. There was a time when she was everything to everyone, and it nearly killed her. 30 years ago, she stood in a hospital corridor at 2 a.m, her hands raw from scrubbing floors. Her uniform smelled like bleach and exhaustion. She'd already worked her day shift at the diner, squeezed in 3 hours at the grocery store, and now she was finishing her overnight cleaning job. Robert had been dead for 6 months. Heart attack at 43. No warning. Just gone. And he'd left her with 2 daughters, a mortgage, and $17 in their checking account. Vivian was 12 then. Clara was 9. They needed school supplies, winter coats, and a mother who didn't cry in the shower so they wouldn't hear. So Margaret worked. And worked. And worked some more. She picked up double shifts while other mothers attended PTA meetings. She packed cold sandwiches for lunch while her daughters ate hot meals she couldn't afford to join. She wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years straight, rotating them carefully so no one would notice. But her girls? They had everything. Dance lessons for Vivian. Art classes for Clara. Birthday parties with real cakes, not box mix. Margaret made sure of it. She remembered Vivian's high school graduation. Her daughter had walked across that stage in a beautiful white dress, accepting awards and scholarships. Margaret had clapped until her palms stung, tears streaming down her face. Vivian never once looked at her in the crowd. Clara's college acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. Full ride to a prestigious university. Margaret had held that letter against her chest and sobbed with relief. Finally, her sacrifices meant something. But somewhere between those grateful daughters and the women mocking her at dinner, something changed. Success had erased their memories. Money had rewritten their history. They'd become the kind of people who forgot where they came from, who forgot the woman who'd built the ladder they'd climbed. Margaret stood at her kitchen sink now, decades later, washing the same dishes her daughters had eaten from. Her hands were older but still strong, still capable. She dried the last plate and set it in the cabinet, thinking about those years of struggle. The pride she'd swallowed, the dreams she'd buried. I gave them everything I had, she whispered to the empty kitchen. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. And somehow, that still wasn't enough. If you believe hard work deserves respect, drop a heart emoji in the comments right now. Thanksgiving dinner. That's when everything truly shattered. Margaret had spent 2 days preparing. Roasted turkey with herb butter. Homemade cranberry sauce. 3 kinds of pie because Clara liked pumpkin and Vivian preferred pecan, and Gerald always asked for apple. She'd set the table with her good china, the set she'd saved for years to buy. Polished the silverware until it gleamed. Folded napkins into perfect triangles. The family arrived late. Vivian complained about traffic. Clara was glued to her phone. The husbands barely acknowledged her beyond an obligatory nod. They sat. They ate. They talked around her like she was furniture. This turkey's a bit dry, Trent mentioned casually, reaching for more wine. Margaret's smile didn't falter. I'll remember that for next year. Oh, will you still be hosting next year? Vivian asked, exchanging a look with Clara. We were actually thinking it might be time to look into some options for you, Mom. Margaret's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Options? Assisted living communities, Clara said gently, though her eyes held no gentleness. You're not getting any younger. That house is too much for you to manage alone. I manage just fine. Do you, though? Vivian leaned back, her voice sharp with impatience. You're 72, Mother. You don't work. You don't contribute to anything anymore. You're basically retired from being useful. There it was. That word again. Useless. Gerald laughed nervously. Trent nodded in agreement. Clara looked at her plate, guilt flickering across her face for exactly 3 seconds before disappearing. Margaret's throat tightened. Her vision blurred at the edges. Excuse me, she managed, standing carefully. Her legs felt unsteady. I need to use the restroom. No one looked up. They were already discussing which facility had the best reviews, debating costs and amenities like she was a piece of furniture they needed to store. In the bathroom, Margaret gripped the sink. Her reflection stared back at her, older and wounded. A tear escaped, then another. She'd given them everything. Her youth, her health, her dreams. Every dollar she'd ever earned had gone toward building their futures. And this was her reward. Dismissal. Disrespect. A nursing home catalog. Margaret wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, looked at herself hard in that mirror. Maybe they've forgotten, she said quietly, her voice gaining strength with each word. But I haven't. Would you forgive them? Or would you teach them a lesson? Tell me in the comments. What Margaret's daughters didn't know could fill a bank vault. Actually, it did fill a bank vault. After Robert died, there was more than just $17. There was land. 40 acres outside town that everyone said was worthless. Too rocky. Too remote. No water access. Robert's father had won it in a poker game back in the 60s, and it had sat empty ever since. The lawyer handling Robert's estate had been blunt. Sell it for whatever you can get, Mrs. Chen. Maybe $5,000 if you're lucky. But Margaret had looked at those property maps, studied the county development plans she'd found at the library, and seen something nobody else saw. The new highway was coming, right past that worthless land. She didn't sell. Instead, she took that $17 and started making calls. She worked her 3 jobs and saved every penny she could scrape together. She talked to developers, learned about zoning laws, attended town meetings where she was the only woman in the room. Within 5 years, that land was worth $50,000. She leased portions to a cell tower company, a billboard advertiser, and eventually a truck stop. Within 10 years, $200,000. She didn't touch it. She let it grow. She reinvested. She played the long game while everyone else played checkers. By the time Vivian graduated high school, that land had made Margaret quietly wealthy. Not flashy rich. Not yacht and mansion wealthy, but comfortable,
Secure.
powerful. Every mystery scholarship Vivian received, Margaret had funded it through an anonymous trust. That lucky break, apartment Clara got in college with impossibly low rent, Margaret owned the building. Vivian's wedding, the one Trent's parents supposedly paid for, Margaret had covered 60% through a series of careful, untraceable gifts. She'd built their entire lives from the shadows, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. And they had no idea. Margaret sat in her small kitchen now, a wooden box open on the table before her. Inside were stock certificates, property deeds, account statements. Decades of careful planning documented in neat folders. She ran her fingers over the papers, each one representing a choice she'd made. A sacrifice. A strategic move. They think their lives were built by their husband's success, she murmured, a small smile playing at her lips. She closed the box with a soft click. But every brick has my name on it. If you're still watching, type Quiet Justice so I know you're part of this family. The checks had been easy to write. Too easy, maybe. That was the problem. Margaret pulled out her leather checkbook, the one she'd used for years to quietly save her daughters from their own mistakes. She flipped through the carbon copies, a paper trail of unconditional love that had never been acknowledged. $10,000 when Vivian's boutique was failing in its first year. She'd sent it anonymously, through a lawyer, labeled as an angel investor interested in supporting women-owned businesses. Vivian had bragged about it for months. Never suspected her mother. $15,000 when Clara and Gerald couldn't make their down payment on the house. Margaret had called it a private loan program for young families. They'd never paid it back. Never intended to. She picked up her phone instead, scrolling through her contacts. She called her lawyer, the same one who'd handled all those anonymous gifts. Thomas? It's Margaret Chen. I need you to prepare some documents for me. Yes, all of them. Every trust, every account, every property deed with their names on it. She paused, listening. That's right. I want everything transferred back to my... She looked like someone who mattered. Because she did. The doorbell rang at 7:15. They were late as always. Margaret opened the door with a calm smile. Vivian entered first, her eyes scanning the room with barely concealed judgment. Clara followed, already on her phone. The husbands trailed behind, looking uncomfortable in their sport coats. Wow, Mom, Vivian said, taking in the elaborate table setting. Trying to impress us? The words stung. They were meant to. But Margaret's smile didn't waver. She'd practiced this smile in the mirror for days. Serene. Knowing. Unshakable. Actually, she said softly, gesturing toward the dining room, I'm the one about to impress you. Something in her tone made Clara look up from her phone. Trent exchanged a glance with Gerald. Vivian's eyebrow arched with skepticism. They moved to the table. Sat in their assigned seats. Margaret had place name cards at each setting, a touch Vivian called unnecessarily fancy, under her breath. Margaret served the first course herself. French onion soup, homemade from scratch. No one thanked her. So, Mother, Clara began, her voice taking on that patronizing tone Margaret had grown to hate. We wanted to talk to you about Meadowbrook Senior Living. They have an opening next month, and we really think... Before we discuss my future, Margaret interrupted gently, I'd like to discuss your past. The table fell silent. Margaret sat at the head of the table, folding her hands in front of her. The candlelight caught her eyes, making them look almost fierce. And your present. And exactly how we arrived at this moment. Vivian laughed nervously. What are you talking about? Margaret reached beneath her chair and pulled out a manila folder. She set it on the table with deliberate care. I'm talking about the truth. Something big is coming. Don't blink. Hit like if you're still with me. Margaret opened the folder slowly. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, transfer receipts. Years of documentation laid bare. Do you remember your boutique, Vivian? The one that was failing in its first year. Margaret's voice was steady, almost conversational. You received $10,000 from a mystery investor. You told everyone it was because they believed in your vision. Vivian's face went pale. How did you? That investor was me. Margaret slid the first document across the table. Here's the transfer receipt. My signature. My account. Clara leaned forward, squinting at the paper. Mom, what is this? This is the truth you've both conveniently forgotten. Margaret pulled out another document. Clara, your house. The one you and Gerald bought 5 years ago. You were $15,000 short on the down payment. A private loan program saved you. Remember? Gerald's hand froze on his wine glass. That was me too. Another paper slid across the polished wood. Loan never repaid, by the way. Not that I expected it. She kept going. Document after document. The twins' private school tuition. The car repairs. The medical bills. The wedding that Trent's family supposedly funded. The apartment with mysteriously low rent. Every gift. Every bailout. Every time they'd caught a lucky break or received unexpected help. All of it. Margaret. Every single time. That worthless land Robert left behind? Margaret's voice gained strength. It wasn't worthless. I turned it into a fortune while working 3 jobs to keep you fed and clothed. I invested it. Grew it. Used it to build the lives you're living right now. Vivian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Your success, your comfort, your security. It all came from me. The woman you called useless. The woman you want to put in a home because I don't contribute anything. Trent cleared his throat. Mrs. Chun, I don't care what you think, Margaret said, and the steel in her voice silenced him instantly. You've been living in a house I helped buy, raising children in schools I paid for, driving cars I made possible. And you had the nerve to sit at my table and laugh at me. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but Margaret wasn't finished. She pulled out one final document. The most important one. This is the deed to your house, Vivian. And yours, Clara. Both properties have my name on the title. I co-signed. I'm listed as a joint owner on both mortgages because your credit wasn't good enough alone. The color drained from both daughters' faces. You said I was useless. Margaret's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. But it seems I was the only one holding everything together. If that gave you chills, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Vivian exploded. You had no right. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. No right to keep this from us. To manipulate us like this. Manipulate you? Margaret's eyebrows rose. I saved you. Repeatedly. Silently. Without asking for so much as a thank you. You should have told us. Vivian's voice cracked with something between rage and panic. Why? So you could feel indebted? So you could pretend to be grateful while still treating me like a burden. Clara was crying now, real tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Mom, we didn't know. We didn't. You didn't want to know, Margaret corrected. You wanted to believe you did it all yourselves. That your success had nothing to do with the old woman who raised you. Gerald stood, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Let's all just calm down and discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss, Margaret said. She stood as well, and somehow she seemed taller than all of them. I've spent 30 years being rational, being patient, being the invisible foundation you built your lives on. What do you want? Trent demanded. Money? Is this about money? Margaret laughed. Actually laughed. I have money. More than you realize. What I want is something you can't give me anymore. What? Clara whispered. Respect. Recognition. Basic human decency from my own children. Margaret's voice softened, but the pain in it was raw. I wanted you to see me. Really see me. Not as free labor or an embarrassment or a problem to be solved. Vivian's hands clenched into fists. So, what? You're just going to cut us off? Take everything back? You can't do that. Margaret walked to the sideboard and picked up 2 more folders. She handed one to each daughter. These are notices of transfer. As of Monday morning, I'm removing myself from all your properties, all your accounts, all your lives. Every penny I've invested, every safety net I've provided, gone. You can't. Vivian's voice pitched higher. We'll lose everything. Then you'll finally understand what I lived with for years. Margaret moved toward the door, calm and certain. The fear, the uncertainty, the weight of keeping your world from falling apart. Mom, please. Clara reached for her, but Margaret stepped back. I already have. Would you walk away too? Like and subscribe for more stories of strength and quiet justice. The coastal cottage was smaller than Margaret's old house, but it was hers. Completely, utterly hers. She'd bought it 3 weeks after that dinner, using money her daughters never knew existed. It sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, close enough to hear the waves, but far enough from town to guarantee peace. Margaret spent her mornings on the porch with coffee, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of pink and gold. No more holidays spent cooking for ungrateful children. No more phone calls asking for money disguised as concern. No more pretending her heart wasn't breaking. Just peace. Finally, the letters started arriving 2 weeks after she moved. Clara's came first, 3 pages of tearful apologies and explanations. We were thoughtless, not cruel. We never meant to hurt you. Please give us another chance. Vivian's letter was shorter, angrier. Accusations mixed with justifications. You raised us to be independent. How are we supposed to know? By the end, though, even Vivian's pride cracked. I miss you, Mom. Margaret read each letter once. Then she filed them away in a drawer she rarely opened. Some wounds don't heal just because someone finally says sorry. Some lessons come too late to matter. She'd thought about forgiveness. Spent long hours watching the waves and wondering if she was being too harsh. But every time she considered reaching out, she remembered that dinner table. That laughter. That word. Useless. She'd given them everything, and they'd treated her like nothing. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice they'd made over and over again until she'd finally had enough. Margaret stood on her porch now, a month into her new life. The salt air tangled her gray hair. The sunset turned the sky into fire. Another letter had arrived today. This one from both daughters together, carefully worded by someone who probably charged by the hour. More apologies. More promises to do better. She held it in her hands, feeling the weight of it. The weight of 30 years of being taken for granted. The weight of finally choosing herself. Margaret walked to the edge of the porch and released the letter. It caught the wind, tumbling away toward the rocks and waves below. Some lessons, she whispered to the ocean, are learned too late. If you've ever found peace after heartbreak, type peace in the comments. 6 months had passed since Margaret left her old life behind. The cottage had become home. The silence had become sanctuary. She woke each morning without dread, ate meals without criticism, spent her money on herself for the first time in decades. Small luxuries, art supplies, books, fresh flowers every week just because they made her smile. The letters had stopped after the 3rd month. Margaret suspected her daughters had finally accepted what she'd known all along. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. She didn't hate them. Hatred required energy she no longer wanted to spend. Instead, she felt something closer to sadness mixed with relief. Grief for what could have been. Gratitude for what finally was. Margaret sat on her porch now, watching the evening tide roll in. She'd started painting recently, something she'd always wanted to do, but never had time for. The canvas beside her showed the ocean in shades of blue she was still learning to mix. A neighbor waved from the beach below. Margaret waved back. She'd made friends here. Real ones. People who knew her as Margaret, not as somebody's mother or walking checkbook. She picked up her brush and added another stroke to her painting. The ocean never looked the same twice. Every sunset brought new colors. Every wave carried different light. Kind of like life, she thought. Always changing. Always moving forward. Margaret set down her brush and spoke to the horizon, her voice steady and sure. Quiet justice isn't about revenge. It never was. She paused, thinking carefully about each word. It's about reclaiming your dignity, remembering your worth, refusing to be invisible anymore. The waves crashed against the rocks, their rhythm eternal and unchanging. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It never did. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your value. She stood, stretching her back, feeling the satisfaction of a day well lived. Her own day. Her own choices. Never mistake humility for ignorance, she said softly, but her words carried weight the ocean wind couldn't take. Never mistake kindness for stupidity. Never mistake patience for weakness. Margaret looked at her painting one more time. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Just like this life. Just like this peace. She smiled, genuine and free. And never forget, the hands that built your world deserve your respect. Every single one of them, including your own. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in final shades of purple and gold. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise. Another day of living for herself. Another chance to remember that she was never, ever useless. She was just done being used. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more life lessons told through quiet justice. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about love, strength, and finding peace in unexpected places. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and inspire others with your own experiences. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And someone out there needs to hear what you have to say.